'Cause We're Nerds, the podcast that covers trends and new releases in comics, movies, video games, board games, and much more. I'm your host, Zach, and with me is my co-host and cousin, Caleb.
Hey everyone.
Thanks for joining us on our current series, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, where we will be discussing each MCU movie in release order, all leading up to Marvel's Avengers Infinity War coming out this April, not May.
Thanks, Marvel.
With the Avengers assembling for a second time in Avengers Age of Ultron, why was Ultron picked as the main villain over countless other villains? How does the speedster we get in this movie compare to the Quicksilver and the X-Men franchise? And does Avengers Age of Ultron live up to the standards set by the first Avengers? Find out these questions and much more on 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, Age of Ultron. So, Caleb, we got a huge announcement this past week that Infinity War is now releasing a week early.
Yeah, so this was met with bittersweet news by me, as you know, Zach. We had some plans set up for the premiere, and that shift kind of messed with those a lot. But other than that, that's really exciting.
It is. Caleb, is this going to mess up our podcast?
Okay, so here's what's up, everyone. Originally, we had this set up so that Black Panther was going to come out the week before Infinity War, and then we were going to put out maybe a predictions episode the week Infinity War was out, and then our actual episode on Infinity War was going to come out the following week. Because the way everything is now, it's actually going to come out the week following Infinity War. So Black Panther is going to come out the day that Infinity War comes out, and you guys will be able to listen to our Infinity War review just the very next week, which is better for you guys.
That's right, and we also have a special surprise for that podcast, which you will have to wait and see when it is released.
Yeah, we'll see how it goes.
So, Caleb, we are now on to our second Avengers, so the Avengers sequel, and this doesn't end Phase 2, even though for me it feels like it ends Phase 2, correct?
Yeah, you're right. I mentioned in an earlier episode that Ant-Man is actually the movie to end Phase 2. I don't know why they made that decision. Ant-Man was the last Marvel movie of the year, so maybe that's why.
But aren't they doing this again this year as the Avengers Infinity War? Shouldn't that be capping off this Phase 3, but they're still including Ant-Man and the Wasp into that?
I don't know if they've actually announced what all is included in Phase 3. I would think that if they're including Ant-Man and the Wasp, then they would go even beyond that and include Avengers 4, which comes out next year, for those of you who don't know.
True. That would make sense. But for this Avengers movie, The Age of Ultron, when was this announced? You mentioned in our Avengers podcast that it was announced right after, right? A sequel?
Yes, so the very first movie came out, and, it was met with worldwide acclaim. And so right there in May 2012, they announced that they were going to do a sequel, and then they announced the release date to that back in August of that year.
Okay, and Joss Whedon was also helmed to direct the sequel.
He was announced to return, but that wasn't until August when they announced the release date. With his announcement to return, they also announced he was going to develop a TV show, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and then he had an outline for this by December. So the ball was rolling for this really quickly.
Now, for me, Age of Ultron feels like it came out in theaters like in 2005, when in reality, it was out like 3 years ago.
I know, it feels very old. I guess it's because we've gotten so many Marvel movies since then, and Marvel in Phase 3, I feel, has really expanded what their movies can be and the quality and the types of movies. So I'm totally with you.
Well, and for me, this doesn't feel like our last Avengers that we have seen, right? So Captain America Civil War feels like our third Avengers movie, when in reality, our third Avengers movie is going to be Infinity War, which means our last Avengers movie up to this point will have been Age of Ultron.
And that's part of what I think makes Phase 3 so great, is we have all these crossovers between characters in the movies. I mean, in Phase 1 and in Phase 2, it was like maybe a quick cameo here or there, but in Phase 3, I mean, we had Civil War, which had tons of characters. We had Doctor Strange showing up in Thor Ragnarok. I mean, it's just all over the place. So you're right. It's Avengers movies are becoming less and less necessary as a medium for bringing all these characters together. And it's becoming more like the comics, which I think is great, where these characters can literally appear in any movie.
Yeah, it's bringing the comics to life, which works really well. And for the Avengers Age of Ultron, when was the title for the Avengers sequel movie announced?
So that was announced at Comic-Con in 2013. And this was a surprise to people because everybody thought Thanos was going to be the villain.
That would make sense since we saw him in Guardians of the Galaxy as well as the Avengers.
Yeah, the post-credit sting in the Avengers. And so, everybody was kind of taken aback. And I think they were a little bummed, too. Ultron is a long-time Avengers villain. He's one of the big ones. But he's nothing compared to Thanos.
He's not. I know Joss Whedon stated that he didn't want to just throw Thanos into the movie, but he wanted to build more into him.
Exactly, and that's what they ended up doing. And Zach, the reason Ultron is even here to begin with is Joss.
Really? So he was the one who decided on putting Ultron into the movie?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that he actually wanted Ultron to be the villain of the first movie, but Marvel had kind of already figured out what that first movie needed to be, so he couldn't do anything. But when he was there for the first one, he said, hey guys, if you ever make another one, the villain should be Ultron, because he loves Ultron. And so when he signed on to come back, that's what he decided to do.
Now, the movie is titled Age of Ultron. Are you familiar with the comic run Age of Ultron?
Yes, and in fact, I had read that when they announced the title of this movie, but I knew that that can't be the story they're doing.
And it's not. This comic book is completely different. If you're trying to read a comic that connects with this movie, I would suggest skipping this one, because the Age of Ultron is a 2013 crossover event, but it's set in an apocalyptic future. So if I'm right, the Earth is conquered and controlled by Ultron, and he is controlling this present Earth from the future. And so the last remaining Avengers send a team to go kill him in the future, as well as sending a team to go kill his creator in the past. And they find out that killing his creator, who I'll talk about later on, was a mistake that caused the current time frame in the future. It's a bunch of time travel, and it really doesn't, connect to this movie whatsoever.
Yeah, you're right. And it's been a few years since I've read it, but I remember really liking that storyline. So I would recommend you read it if you're interested in the comics. But for this movie, completely different.
But for this movie, we do have a slew of cast members who are returning. And we also have some new cast members. We have James Spader playing the villainous Ultron. We have Aaron Taylor Johnson playing Pietro Maximoff. We have Elizabeth Olsen playing Wanda Maximoff. Paul Bettany playing Jarvis Vision, Claudia Kim playing Dr. Helen Cho, and Andy Serkis as the henchman Ulysses Claw.
That's right, a lot of new people. I mean, Avengers had a lot of people in it, but man, they really bring, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 new people in here. And that's just the major ones.
Now, going to Ultron, I know that Joss Whedon actually wanted James Spader to voice Ultron, and he was his first and pretty much only choice for Ultron, because as Joss Whedon put it, James Spader is able to talk in an eerie but calm voice. Did you know him before this movie?
I think I had seen him in commercials for The Blacklist. I think had come on at that point, but I might have seen him in a couple movies. I didn't know who he was, though.
Yeah, I knew James Spader from Boston Legal. My family watched that. And so I knew his voice and the character fairly well as well.
And it's funny you say the voice, because Joss actually only wanted him for the voice originally. And when he came in and was talking about it, he said, if I'm going to be a main character, a voice isn't enough. And so he was brought in to do the motion capture for this as well.
And he did such a great job acting. In fact, like post credits, Elizabeth Olsen talked about how when she was acting with James Spader, Ultron's like 7 or 8 feet tall in this movie. So they had basically wiring, or like they had some type of contraption above him with like red eyes where Ultron would be.
Yeah,
so
it's like a backpack with these rods going up.
Yeah, exactly. So that Aaron Taylor Johnson and Elizabeth Olsen and all the other Avengers had to look at those eyes. But James Spader gave such an emotional performance that Elizabeth Olsen stated that she would like look into his eyes instead. And Aaron Taylor Johnson would like scream out, "Look at the red balls!" And so to remind her that like she can't look at him, she needs to look up, even though James Spader was doing an incredible job.
Yeah, they actually rehearsed those multiple times looking at James while he was doing it so they could kind of get in the rhythm of what he was doing. Because like you said, they can't look at him while the scene is happening, which for me, I feel like that would be very difficult to do.
Well, not only do we have James Spader, but we have Aaron Taylor Johnson playing Pietro Maximoff. Now, I know you knew him really well from Kick-Ass, correct?
Yes, I knew him from that, as well as the Godzilla movie that had come out the year prior, I believe.
Yeah, in which he actually acts alongside Elizabeth Olsen.
Yes, so they played husband and wife in that film, and here they're brother and sister.
Yeah, so did you know that it took Joss Whedon over a year to convince Aaron to accept this role? And I knew that Aaron Taylor Johnson didn't want to accept it because he knew the intensity of the Marvel contracts, that once you're kind of locked into Marvel, you are locked in.
Yep.
There's also heavy time constraints. There's a large cast, so you can't really stand out. But it was Elizabeth Olsen who convinced him to do this, with their time spent together in the Godzilla movie. And so he decided to take on the role.
Yeah, I think he made the right choice.
Now, somebody who has been in these movies, well, his voice has, but he hasn't physically been in them, is Paul Bettany. Did I say that right? Bettany?
Yeah, I mean, you're putting a bit more emphasis. It's Bettany, but yeah. So he's been the voice of Jarvis since Iron Man 1.
Now, obviously, when they produced Iron Man 1, as we've talked about, they had no idea it would get this big. So, I mean, they were taking a shot, right? Because in this movie, Bettany makes a physical appearance, but at any point in these Marvel movies, he could have terminated his contract if he had one.
Yeah, I don't think he had a multi-picture contract the same way the other actors did, just because he was a voice. But this was a concept that Joss had when he wanted to do Ultron. Even back in the first movie, he said, we should do Ultron and you should have Paul Bettany play the Vision because it should be a version of Jarvis in these films, which is different from the comic books. But I think for the films, it works really well. And it's insane how well that worked out. Just the fact that the voice matches, and also he looks like the character from the comics. I mean, it's pretty spot on.
Oh, exactly. I could see a ton of voice actors not being able to step into that role and actually act as Vision. I knew Bettany from A Knight's Tale with Heath Ledger,
yep,
as well as his role in A Beautiful Mind. And later on in Da Vinci Code, he played in Kiss Kiss Bang Bang alongside Robert Downey Jr., who, as we mentioned, was kind of his breakout role. And so, I mean, Paul Bettany is like an outstanding actor that has done a lot of movies.
Yes, and like you said, A Knight's Tale, I know him primarily as a more comedic actor. So this was a bit different from what I was expecting or what I knew him from.
Yet still a great role.
So we also get Claudia Kim as Dr. Helen Cho.
I know she did a couple movies after Age of Ultron, but if you look at her filmography, she had only appeared in maybe like a TV show here or there before Age of Ultron.
Yeah, I didn't know who she was, and I honestly still don't know who she is. I haven't seen anything I could recognize her in, but she's really only a minor role here, so it would be easy to see her in something else and not know it.
But one character we both know is Andy Serkis, who played Golem in the Lord of the Rings movies, as well as Emperor Snoke in the newer Star Wars movies.
Yes, Andy Serkis as Ulysses Klaue. He's probably the actor that I knew the most coming into this because of the Lord of the Rings films and because of the Planet of the Apes films, the new ones. He played a big part in that. And they brought him in here to play Mr. Claw, but he was also a consultant for the motion capture, I believe for James Spader, that they were doing in this film.
Which would make sense because of his rich history with motion capture. You know, I'm familiar with, as we've stated, you know, Golem and other characters. And so seeing him as like just an actor, not behind some motion capture suit, was very interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit shocking. Motion capture is really his thing. Although I think about this time, it was when he started trying to step out from behind the motion capture and do more on-screen appearances.
So Caleb, now that we've covered the cast and some background, why don't we jump into the synopsis of our movie?
The Avengers are back as they hunt down the remnants of the evil organization Hydra. But after a successful attack, Tony Stark and Bruce Banner inadvertently create the evil robot Ultron. Now, the Avengers must fight to prevent Ultron and his two new companions, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, from dismantling the team from the inside out. If they fail, it will mean the destruction of all life on Earth.
Now, this movie jumps right into action in the Sokovia Woods, and even though this is the first scene we see in the movie, it was actually the last scene to be shot in the movie. But it's here that we kind of get the Avengers assembled. What are your thoughts in seeing all of them fight in the woods, and just kind of your opening thoughts to the movie?
So one of the most memorable shots from the first movie is during the Battle of New York, where it kind of pans around from each character in this one continuous shot. Here, they start with it. It's like the very first shot in the movie. You go from one character to the other. It's one continuous. It's beautiful, Zach. This looks like something that was ripped straight from the comic books, which is a lot of how this film feels, even more so than the first one. I think that this film makes the first one look cheap by comparison. I remember a lot of people at the time were complaining that the first one looked cheap, partially because of the aspect ratio that Joss chose to shoot in. But this one looks aesthetically head and shoulders above the first one.
Yeah, that shot is amazing. And I remember when the news broke that Marvel was able to get some of the film rights to include Spider-Man in the MCU. And that shot was used along with, I believe, some of the shots from a Spider-Man movies that included him overlaid into that shot. Like, oh, what if Spider-Man was with the Avengers during that scene, right? I don't know if you remember that, but that shot was definitely used in the trailers for Age of Ultron. I love the Captain America running language joke that they used throughout the movie. That was funny. Also, I thought that they carried on Captain America's power level from the Winter Soldier. So instead of making him pretty weak, as my complaint was in the Avengers movie, they kept up his BA power level. So I thought they continued that on from his previous installment.
Yeah, everyone here seems pretty useful. The only exception might be Hawkeye, which I hate to say because I know he gets a lot of hate. I think it's just because we don't see him do much because he gets injured pretty quickly here.
And we see a funny encounter as well with Thor and with Captain America when Thor hits Captain's shield. And it creates that shockwave we saw in the first Avengers, but this time it's not centered at each other. It's centered in a pointed direction.
And that's something this movie does a lot, is there are tons and tons of callbacks, most of them to the first Avengers, but some of them to other films.
So we find out that the Avengers are assaulting a Hydra fortress, which interestingly enough, this was actually filmed in the Aosta Valley. I think I'm saying that right. It's a fort called Fort Bard. So it's a 19th century castle that's located between Italy and France. And it looks spectacular, Caleb. I want to go to that castle. It just looks awesome.
Yeah.
And it's here that we run into Baron von Wolfgang Strucker, who we briefly saw at the end of Winter Soldier.
Yeah, so real quick, just to recap, this guy is a Hydra member. He runs a lot of the stuff. And here in the opening, I had some questions about how he'd been operating. There are some lines in here that I don't remember, which basically explains that he was working for Hydra under S.H.I.E.L.D., and I guess his funding has just been cut off since the collapse of S.H.I.E.L.D. back in Winter Soldier.
And yeah, Caleb, I mean, he somehow has ended up with the scepter. So whether that got into the hands of S.H.I.E.L.D. and then somehow was given to him because of the Hydra, I'm just assuming. I think a lot of things are assumed with him.
Yeah, and I think that's actually a good explanation that it didn't really hit me till you said that. Yeah, S.H.I.E.L.D. should have the scepter, and if Hydra is inside S.H.I.E.L.D. running it, they could have easily taken it and given it to him. So I think that answers a question that we had during that post-credit scene in The Winter Soldier.
Now, in this opening fight scene, we also see that Iron Man calls forth his Iron Legion to protect the Sokovians from harm.
Yeah, they've gotten a makeover, though. They're no longer each Iron Man suits. Now they're more like androids, autonomous. He just calls them in, and they're like police officers.
And, that it makes a lot of sense after Iron Man 3, since all those suits were destroyed. But I'm not really sure why he has an Iron Legion, because at the end of Iron Man 3, I can't remember what protocol he initiates, but it destroys all of them, indicating that he was only going to have one Iron Man suit, and that was going to be his. And yet, it looks like he kind of went back off of that and now has an Iron Legion.
Yeah, that was some of my issues with the end of Iron Man 3 and how it ties into other films. Watching it this time, I believe I remember talking about there's a line or something that indicates that he's not completely done with the suits. I could be remembering that wrong. But yeah, it's one of those things that's kind of weird that ties into, that thing I talk about where Marvel does something and the follow-up doesn't quite mesh exactly well with it.
And so at the end of Captain America Winter Soldier, we got a glimpse of not only Strucker, but we also saw the twins, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff.
Also known as Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch in the comics. These are, in the comics, mutants, and they're children of Magneto, the X-Men villain, right, Zach?
Yeah, are you familiar with their comic origins?
I don't know their origins, but I'm familiar with their comic book counterparts.
Yes, because they are play a big role in the comics, and so Wanda as well as Pietro were created by both Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and they both, since they're twins, appeared in X-Men issue 4, which was 1964. So, starting with Wanda, she looks nothing like she does now, right? And it's basically like all the females back in the 1964 when they created them as superheroes. Mm-hmm. She's wearing a green bathing suit. It just does not look good, Kate.
Wow. I haven't seen that.
But in the comics, they were both mutants, as you mentioned. They were both recruited by the mutant Magneto to join the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And in the comics, it's very clear that they are both very reluctant to join him. And they only join the Brotherhood because of a death they owe Magneto because he saved Wanda. And so they basically fight the X-Men with the Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. And after, I believe, like a couple issues, they leave Magneto after they state that their debt is paid, and they join the Avengers in issue 16, which was released in 1965. And when they joined the Avengers, it was actually a new lineup of Avengers, which was led by Captain America, and included both of them, as well as Hawkeye, which I think we get a little glimpse of later on in this movie. And so being kind of prominent Avengers, they actually jump around in different comics. So, for example, the West Coast Avengers, the regular Avengers, at one point, Wanda and Vision have a love story. They have kids, and then, like most comics, that's all erased. It basically never happens. But some of the major comics for Wanda is House of M. Did you read any of that story arc?
I've never read it, but I've heard a lot about it.
Yes, it is a great comic book story arc. And so in the House of M comics, both of the twins play a prominent role, mainly Wanda, because she uses her mutant powers to basically restart the Earth, make mutants the majority instead of the minority, and then have Magneto the ruler of them all. And at the end of that storyline, she basically says 3 words, no more mutants. And it eliminates 90% of the world's mutants and brings everything kind of back to normal, except now there's only a handful of mutants. And then she dies, and then she's brought back to life, right? And then, both of these characters, you see them in different storylines, so like Avengers versus X-Men, Axis, Secret Empire. An interesting tidbit is in the storyline of Axis, if you read that, it's actually revealed that Wanda and Pietro aren't mutants, and they aren't kids of Magneto.
Yeah, that's one of those famous Marvel retcons going on.
That's right. And, they make another backstory that they were experiments of a cosmic being called the High Evolutionary. And what's interesting about this is that retcon of the story took place around the time of this movie because it was around the Fox-Disney dispute of mutants and who to use what in what movie. And so, what was going on, had to affect the comics. And so, it's a really interesting story with Wanda. Pietro basically has the same story, except that there's a block of time that he leaves the Avengers. He goes off and marries Crystal, the Inhuman, right, Caleb? Because you've watched all of that TV show.
Oh, all of it, Zach. It's so good. 3 thumbs up.
No. Where's the third thumb?
I'm a mutant. No. I got a third thumb.
Which, I'm familiar with because as a reader of the Fantastic Four series, Johnny Storm, the Human Torch, dated Crystal, the Inhuman. So anyways, basically, he marries her. He has some of the same comic runs on the West Coast, Avengers vs. X-Men, Axis. They're both in Secret Empires. But what's interesting to note here is that Wanda, while she's more of a hero, Pietro is more of a villainous character. He's always more on the dark side than she is. So why I mention those backstories is not only are they interesting, but it actually shows that Wanda is incredibly powerful. If in 3 words she's able to just erase 90% of the mutants, she has a ton of power, as well as the fact that what's happening, in the movies changes what happens in the comics.
So you touched on a little bit her powers. What actually are her powers in the comic books?
That's a good question that I don't know if anybody could really answer. If you go to Wikipedia, there's like this huge list of powers that she has displayed, but basically it's magic. She is able to, fly. She can make shields. She can do some telekinesis, some telepathy. And on top of that, she also has a lot of dealings with like the mystical arts. So like Doctor Strange, Brother Voodoo, and other characters in the comics.
And Pietro is pretty much the exact same as he's in the comics, right? It's just super speed.
Yeah, he's basically Marvel's Flash.
Yeah, and that's what I thought. And you touched on also a little bit the Fox thing, and who has the rights. And because these characters, they are X-Men, they are that property, but because they also have such a strong history with the Avengers, that's why both Fox and Marvel can use these characters in their movies, which we saw, if you saw Days of Future Past, the X-Men movie, because they have their own version of Quicksilver, who is much older than the version that we get here, because he was born in the 80s.
Yeah, and both actors actually appear alongside each other in the movie Kick-Ass. So on one hand, we have Aaron Taylor Johnson, and on the other hand, we have, the other actor.
So, moving on from that lengthy explanation of the Maximoff twins, we do see the Avengers in their fighting, and Zach, we've got some new costumes here at the beginning. What do you think?
Well, the biggest and probably most substantial change is Bruce Banner's hair, which I thought, no, I actually liked it. I thought it, it was different, whatever, it worked. Another small change is we have Captain America's, shield as well as magnetic clips on his arm. So he's able to recall his shield, which is an upgrade we see in the comics that happened in the 60s. Iron Man upgraded his armor.
And actually, Cap's whole costume, it's worth noting, is completely different. And this is his first modern costume that I'd say looks really, really good. That's actually like a Captain America one, because I loved the one in the Winter Soldier, but that's not the traditional style suit.
Yeah, you're correct, and it looked flawless in this outing. We also have some changes with Hawkeye. First, he shows off a lot of different arrows that we didn't see in the Avengers movie, but if you notice, his costume isn't all just black garb. It now has actually more purple in it, which is a callback to his original costume in the comics.
And I think here he's wearing like a trench coat type thing. I know in set photos it's a whole lot easier to tell, but when he takes that off, his costume is even closer to the comics than it was before.
Now, I think one of the biggest changes in costumes is with the Black Widow, who you mentioned in Captain America Winter Soldier, how you love that she has these Tron lights all over her costume.
Zach, I don't remember disliking this costume like a ton, but watching it this time, I do not like this costume. And it's not just the Tron lights either. This costume looks baggy. It doesn't look like it fits her right. I don't like the material it's made out of. It's just weird.
And I know this is a minor thing, but they even changed her hair. So, like, they chopped it. They made it more fuzzy. I'm not really sure why they went with this total redo of the Black Widow. As we talked about, I loved her costume and her look in The Winter Soldier.
Yeah, they redo their costumes every movie, so I think maybe they feel obligated to change it. Anyway, moving on. Iron Man also has a new suit. He's in the Mark 43, which is the step up from the one he had in Iron Man 3. Remember, the Mark 42 was a prototype. This one is the fully realized version of that prototype, and is pretty much the same design, except the color scheme has changed a little bit. There's way more red on it than that beigey color.
Now, in this fight scene, after it starts to calm down, we see that Natasha is sent after the Hulk to calm him down. Caleb, what did you think about the fact that the sun is getting real low, big guy?
I couldn't look at this the same way as I did the first time I saw the movie because of Thor Ragnarok. They play that joke so many times in that movie, and watching it this time, I just couldn't help but chuckle.
That's so true, because I remember after Age of Ultron, this was one of the low points seen in the movie. Nobody, well, I shouldn't say nobody, but a majority of the fans didn't think this worked. You know, when I first watched the movie, I thought it was okay, but as you just mentioned, Caleb, now I just laughed at it because of what Thor Ragnarok used it as in their running jokes.
Yeah. So intercut here, we also see Tony infiltrate that castle you were talking about earlier. He takes out their shield and he goes down there and he finds a ton of stuff. There's a Chitauri Leviathan hanging in there. I'm not sure if that's the one that Hulk brought down with Thor in the first Avengers, but it could be. And weaponry and all kinds of stuff in there. But the most important thing he finds is Loki's scepter, which is the entire reason they've been raiding this place.
I mean, he also finds his entire team dead, but yes, he does find the scepter.
Well, Zach, that's a vision caused by Scarlet Witch, which is the first time we see her powers in this film. And he does see the whole team dead. And Zach, I think that this is a callback to the Iron Man 3 PTSD storyline. We talked about how that kind of seems to be just fixed in that movie. But here, it's explained later in the movie that Wanda lets you see your worst fears. That's one of the things that she can let you see. And his worst fear is letting the team down because he's not strong enough to protect them. And his whole PTSD thing was being strong enough to protect people. And so I think this is a loose tie-in to that theme.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good tie-in. I thought it was a great theme to set in motion kind of how the villain came out, and as well as Tony Stark's motivation. On the other hand, though, I don't think the explanation really fits with it. Caleb, you said Wanda is allowed to allow people to see their worst fears, but it's also explained that this is somehow tied into the Soul Stone and thus the experiments on her, which, you know, wasn't, I thought, really flushed out.
I didn't feel that with this particular vision, but I do have a question about a later vision with that exact same thing.
Is it like the actual vision or just like a...
No, not the actual vision, but Thor's vision later in the film.
And Caleb, I will mention, you said this is the first time we see her powers. We actually see, I believe these are her powers a little earlier. When Captain America takes down Strucker, the Scarlet Witch like does this really weird creeping backwards and shuts the doors. And I think this just helps show that she's kind of creepy, to be honest.
Yeah.
But B, like, we really don't know the extent of her powers. They're never really explained. And it's just kind of weird.
which they call out exactly in the film when Maria Hill says she's weird.
Exactly.
Tony shakes it off and they do grab the scepter and they go home to party. So once they get back home, we see Avengers Tower for the first time in all of its glory. Remember, Zach, we saw it very briefly in The Winter Soldier, but this is the first time we see it all together.
Yes, a newly reconstructed Avengers Tower after it was partially damaged in the War of New York.
So we get a couple things here. First, we learn that Captain America is the boss. Tony says, yeah, he's the boss. I just make everyone look cool and do cool things and give them cool gadgets and stuff, which I really like.
And we also, I believe it was back in Sokovia that we get a indication that Maria Hill is running something. And then it's here that we actually get to see her as well, that she is now a part of the Avengers and not just a civilian worker that we were led to believe in Captain America.
Yeah, so this whole Cap being boss thing, I think might answer one of my questions for this film. I mentioned before in an earlier episode how the Avengers are just kind of together in this film, and the first Avengers really left off saying, oh, how are we going to bring them all together? And I found it a big issue that they're just here together in this film. Because Cap is boss, and because in that last scene, they say that they've been raiding Hydra bases ever since S.H.I.E.L.D. collapsed. I think that maybe Cap brought the team together, and he's the reason that they're all together again. I would have really liked to either see that or hear about it in some dialogue, but at least in my head, that makes sense.
And what is neat is that Captain America is the leader of the Avengers in the comics, and so it fits with his origins. Now, somebody else they bring in is Dr. Helen Cho. Now, Caleb, I'm a little confused why they kind of have this character in the Avengers. My guess, and correct me if I'm wrong, are they trying to reach the Chinese audience?
I believe that is exactly what they're doing.
She does have some backstory in the comics. Well, not her herself, but her son is Amadeus Cho, who in the comics is the 7th smartest person on the earth. I've mentioned him before in one of our podcasts. As well as if you're a comic reader, you know that Amadeus is currently the totally awesome Hulk. So he's actually a Hulk. Yeah. Don't get confused. In the comics, there's like 5 of them running around. A red one, a gray one, a green one, a young one, a sun one, a old one, whatever. There's
it's like always... the Green Lantern Corps, right?
Pretty much now. So that could be pointing that we might get Amadeus Cho later on, but I wouldn't put money on the fact that he would appear.
And I'd agree with that. So Tony basically brings the scepter in and asks Thor if they can look at it for a couple days before he takes it back to Asgard. And this is where I have a big question, Zach. He wants to look at this thing with Bruce so that they can figure out AI so that they can put a shield around the world, right? Which, again, call back to his PTSD thing about protecting stuff. He already has AI. Jarvis is AI. Even if you made the argument that Jarvis is not AI and is just super complex, his other robots that are going down and protecting people, and his Iron Legion, those are 100% AI. There's no way they could be doing what they're doing without it being AI. So I don't really understand why he's wanting to use the scepter to get AI when he already has it. I feel like this was a bad explanation for what they thought would be audiences that don't know what they're talking about.
And maybe he's wanting to upgrade the AI. That would be my assumption, even though he states he wants to create artificial intelligence, which you are correct, Caleb, wouldn't make sense because he already has it. And so I'm assuming he just wants to get a better upgraded version that is maybe more powerful and can protect his teammates from dying, which for me, something that doesn't work is the explanation of the staff, because we later find out that the staff has the Mind Stone in it, which, okay, I guess makes sense in why the staff can create artificial intelligence. However, it directly contradicts the Avengers when I believe there's a line in there that we find out that Loki's staff was simply powered by the Tesseract. It wasn't given his gem, it was, powered through the power of the Tesseract, which is another gem.
Yeah, Zach, I remember you mentioning that in our last episode. I'm still not 100% sure if that's right. I would be really interested to try to find that clip again so we know for sure. But if that's true, then that would be in direct conflict with it. My memory is that it's just its own thing. Because they don't have the Tesseract, it wouldn't make sense for it to be powered. But anyway, that's a whole other discussion. Pretty much, they do take the staff and they do run some tests on it. And then they do go off to do the wrap party 3 days after they've raided the base.
That's right. And so it's actually at this party that we get a lot of cool cameos, cool scenes. The first one is Stan Lee, the man.
Yeah, I like his cameo here, but why are these veterans here? Like, they seem really out of place at this party.
No, this is actually taken from the comics. I can't remember what comic run it is, but it introduces the fact that Steve Rogers hangs out with a bunch of veterans. Like, those are his friends.
Oh.
And so they brought that into the into this storyline, right? Is that he knew those people and those are the only friends he can invite to the party, and so he does.
That makes so much sense. I didn't even think about it because you don't really see him with them.
And this is actually a fun nod to Stan Lee's time in the Army. I'm not sure if you knew this, but Stan Lee actually did sign up to go into the Army. But he actually went to the Army's medical division and used his prowess as an artist to help write slogans about preventing venereal diseases. And he would create the slogan, and Dr. Seuss would then draw out the poster.
I didn't know that about Dr. Seuss.
Yep.
Yeah, that's funny. But yeah, he did do some time in the military, and I know that because that plays a big role in the history of Marvel because he was gone for several years.
That's right. And it is in this cameo that Stan Lee uses his catchphrase, Excelsior, which is kind of his phrase used in the comics as a sign-off, and that he has stated simply means like an upward and forward and like beyond.
Yes, and I think it's actually a word in another language, but I don't remember which one. So at this party, we do have a couple visitors from other people. We've got the Falcon and War Machine walking around.
I thought this was a great inclusion here because Sam Wilson as well as Rhodey basically drop hints as why they aren't on the Avengers team. So for Sam Wilson, he states to Captain America that the missing persons case has kept him busy, which we both know he is looking for Bucky Barnes in the Winter Soldier.
Yes, and then War Machine is off doing military stuff because he is in the Air Force. Now, their inclusion here is nice because it's just nice to see them, but it's also kind of showing that they're friends with the group, which sets up them being on the team later in the film, as well as Falcon's statement that, quote, avenging is your world, also foreshadowing that avenging is going to be his world as well.
That's right, which we'll see later on in the next Captain America installment. Now, Caleb, what did you think about the game that was being played during this whole movie of Hide the Zucchini?
Well, Zach, I'm not a big fan of zucchini, so I usually like to hide bananas, personally.
Oh, no! What does that even mean?
What does hide the zucchini mean, Zach? No, but this Bruce and Natalie relationship, here at the beginning, I wasn't expecting it. I have no issue with it here. I think that their dialogue is nice. I think it's kind of funny. It's touching's not the right word, but I think it works in this scene in particular.
How about the whole movie?
There are certain scenes that I don't think work as well in the rest of the movie that we'll talk about as we get to them. But the setup here is good, I think.
I actually didn't like the relationship at all. I didn't think it really worked. But what does work in this scene is having the Avengers all together. And the scene I'm talking about is when the party is done and they're all sitting around, lounging around, and all trying to lift the hammer. I do remember that this scene was shown in Comic-Con and everybody loved it. It was shown again and again and again in the trailers. And I think the reason why is because this is one of the best scenes because it humanizes all of the Avengers.
Yeah, and I think that this is one of the strong points of the movie, is that it's got great character interactions through the entire thing. Even more so than the first one, because they're all together most of the time in this film. And so they do all take a crack at the hammer. No one's able to move it, except Steve is able to move it a little bit.
Which scares Thor.
Which does scare Thor. It's really funny. But he's able to lift it in the comics too, so it's a nice tie into that.
That's right. And Iron Man here also has a interesting one-liner. He says that when he becomes king, that he will institute prima nocta, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, Caleb, but it is a historical right for a lord to fondue with a bride on her wedding night. Yes.
I did not
It's kind
know
of this
that.
like really dirty joke that they throw in there.
That was probably ad-libbed by Robert on the day, I would assume.
I could definitely believe that.
So while they're having fun, someone's got to break down the party, and Ultron comes in. Now, there was a scene earlier where Ultron, they've been trying to activate him before the party, and it wasn't working. And through some, I don't know if it's the gym or what, it works. And he comes in, and he's basically like a Jarvis at this point. He's just a bodiless program. And then he pretty much dismantles Jarvis and inserts himself into one of Tony's Iron Legion.
And it's during the scene that I believe he talks about having no strings on him. And you can kind of hear that soundtrack from Pinocchio, the song, I Have No Strings on Me, which is a song that was both used in the trailer as well as kind of throughout this movie. So thanks, Disney, for acquiring Marvel. You're already infiltrating its very being.
Yeah, but I think that was actually Joss's idea to use that. It's creepy. And it makes sense, too, the way they use it.
No, it is definitely creepy and makes a ton of sense. And it's here that we are introduced into a somewhat physical form and our first kind of real appearance of a physical Ultron. So, Caleb, I had mentioned that Ultron is a long-term villain. He was created in the comics by Roy Thomas and John Buscema, and he appeared in Avengers issue 54 that issued in 1968. And as we'll later talk about in this movie, he actually didn't appear as Ultron. He appeared as the Crimson Cowl.
Yes. A robot with a cape.
Pretty much. He was a mysterious villain who was wearing a red hood / cape, and he was leading a villainous group called the Masters of Evil, because when you want to name your evil group, you call them the Masters of Evil. And he led them against the Avengers, and it was an issue later that it was identified that he was Ultron. So in the comics, his backstory is that he was created by Dr. Hank Pym, who we'll find out in our next podcast as he appears in the Ant-Man movie. But he was originally Ant-Man in the original Avengers comics. Ant-Man, then Giant Man, and then he became Yellow Jacket. So he actually created Ultron because he was trying to create artificial intelligence. And so he created Ultron, and it was Ultron 1. And then Ultron actually became evil. I couldn't really find a reason why he wanted to start killing everybody. But he created Ultron 2, 3, 4, and 5, and basically improved himself into Ultron 5. And that's who the Crimson Cowl was. Now, some interesting just tidbits of Ultron is that Ultron 5 does create not a new body for himself, but somebody else who we'll see later on in this movie. And then he has basically upgrades that add different stuff. So like his Ultron 6 appearance, he had a new body of adamantium. It wasn't vibranium, it was adamantium, which Marvel couldn't use because Fox owns that in the X-Men comics. In Ultron 7, he attacked Pietro and Crystal at their wedding, which I mentioned about in Quicksilver's backstory. In Ultron 8, he created a wife for himself, because I guess robots need wives, named Jocasta, which was the mind of Hank Pym's wife, Janet Van Dyne, who is the Wasp. And then in the current comics, he's Ultron 16. So, I mean, he's had different runs, like the Ultron Imperative, Ultron Initiative. I talked about in our Guardians of the Galaxy that there is a comic run called Annihilation, then Annihilation Conquest. He actually played a huge role in Annihilation Conquest. And in the current comics, if you follow those at all, he actually, what's interesting is that there's an all-new Ultron who is a mixture of Ultron and his creator, Hank Pym, who like sacrifices himself and somehow they join together. And so Hank Pym is kind of believed dead, but he's actually Ultron, and it's very weird and not necessary at all. But he was, he has been a long-term villain and was created back in the 60s.
And so here they take those ideas and they kind of boil them down. And when he's created, he does this scan of the internet.
So is he now uploaded into the internet and can go kind of wherever he wants to?
I think this is a couple things. Initially, I think he's just reading information off the internet. I think immediately after this, or maybe during, he has uploaded himself, because we see in the next few scenes, he is attacking parts of the world. There's actually a cut scene around here talking about how he's trying to hack nuclear codes for all the countries. So it's a big deal.
Well, it's after this initial scene with our Ultron and at the Avengers Tower that we actually adventure back to Sokovia, to the Hydra base, where the twins meet Ultron. So he actually has new armor now. When was he able to find the time to build this new armor?
Well, there's a line later on talking about how metal men are bursting in places and stealing stuff. So I think what he's done is he's built tons of these robots, which we will see later in the film, and he's sent them around the world to grab the different components. And he does this a few times in the film, we see. And so it's something that he just likes to do. Part of this, I think, is his ultimate goal is to be better than humans. But part of this is also kind of a tie back to Tony, his creator, because Tony constantly builds new suits as well.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's in the comics, Ultron shares some brain patterns with his creator, Hank Pym. So I think they, have this in the movie and they allude to it, that Iron Man and Ultron are kind of one and the same, but just a little bit different.
Yeah, it's kind of like if Tony weren't as good as he is.
And it's alluded to in this meeting between Ultron and the twins, as I believe Ultron states like, oh, you knew what you were doing. And Wanda Maximoff basically states that she pointed Tony Stark in a direction and hoped that there would be some negative outcome. And this was that negative outcome.
And it's also here, it's actually not in the base. It's a little bit before that in a very short scene in a church where we see Ultron in this red cowl. That is a callback to the Crimson Cowl that, Zach, you were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
And then we do fast forward a little bit to that Hydra base where we see that he has built a factory basically in there.
That's right. Now, Caleb, I did want to ask you, what did you think of Ultron's armor?
Well, I prefer his drone's armor that we see towards the end of the movie. Those are pretty much the quintessential Ultron look. And the main Ultron, I think Ultron Prime, as he's called in the script or behind the scenes, I don't think they ever refer to him as that in the movie. His look is more humanized in this film. His final look is a little bit closer to that other version, but still not exactly. So I like the other look because it's more robotic. It's less feeling. However, watching it this time with distance between my kind of initial reaction, I don't mind it. It's fine. I think it's weird that his cheeks look like speakers.
True.
But other than his face and the shape of his eyes and a little bit of his mouth, he looks pretty much like the comic version.
To some extent, yeah. I mean, I actually love his height, how tall he is, because he looks incredibly menacing. I'm not sure what was going on with his face, if maybe they went back in and had to CGI out a mustache. But his face just looks really weird. And I don't know if, specifically his mouth, it just doesn't look right. And maybe that's just because he's a robot. So I actually didn't really like this first incantation of him. The second, like his second armor he gets, I think is a little bit better. So he seems menacing, but I don't like how they how they humanized him. And, I was a little disappointed, I guess. In this viewing, when I originally watched the movie, I thought it was okay, but it has not gotten better over time.
Yeah, and I think my feelings are the opposite, where it has gotten better with time.
Now, I do have a question, because it's here we get the twins' movie backstory, which is very different. They're not mutants, because that's owned by Fox, right? And
Right.
They don't have a dad who's a mutant or any of that stuff. They were created by Strucker with the staff, but they originally are Sokovians who were attacked with some shells, and I don't believe they state who attacked them, but what they do state is that they see a bomb land right next to them, and it says Stark Industries on it. So it's kind of a callback to Iron Man 1. I thought that Tony, after Iron Man 1, got out of the weapon business.
He did. I'm assuming that this was before that, because they're pretty old at this point. And they're talking about how they were just kids and this happened. So I think it would have been back before Iron Man 1 or around that time.
All right, well, that makes sense. But wouldn't they have heard or read about the fact that Iron Man is kind of done with that and he's more a protector versus the fact that it was most likely like a terrorist group that was attacking them?
Maybe, but when people hold grudges, it's very hard to get them to stop holding that grudge. So I kind of go with the fact that this is part of their motivation. Yeah, I mean, that's all I have to say about that.
Well, it's kind of after some of this backstory that we return to the Avengers Tower, where the Avengers have to go offline to trace where Ultron has gone, and they start pouring through some documents, finding interesting tidbits and words, such as Wakanda and vibranium.
Yeah, and I thought this was a plot hole for a moment, because Tony knows that vibranium comes out of Wakanda, but then I took a step back and realized his father probably knew because he had the shield, so it makes sense for Tony to know, but I don't think the world at large knows vibranium comes out of Wakanda.
No, and I know they mentioned Howard Stark got vibranium out of Wakanda. I guess I didn't pick up on the fact that Tony Stark knows that.
Yeah, I actually don't think it's mentioned exactly where Howard got the vibranium, but I'm assuming there'd be files around, right? And Tony, he's so smart, he probably reads everything, so I can go with that. The rest of them don't seem to know that's the case, so that, I guess, is the logical conclusion.
But who they do find is somebody to chase after who might know what Ultron is up to, Ulysses Claw. And it's here that we jump again to a South Africa shipyard.
In the comics, Ulysses Claw is a Black Panther villain, right, Zach?
You are correct. He is a Black Panther villain, but interestingly enough, he did not appear first in a Black Panther comic. He appeared in a Fantastic Four comic. He actually appeared in 1966 in Fantastic Four 53, which was right after Black Panther's first appearance in Fantastic Four 52. So kind of in the comics, I mean, he has killed Black Panther's father, T'Chaka, and he took vibranium from Wakanda, and because of that, they chopped off his hand. And he then, later on, basically to gain powers and battle the Black Panther and all these other superheroes, he transformed himself into a living sound and got a attached vibranium sonic hand. And an interesting side note is that he was then captured again, but was freed by the Crimson Cow and joined the Masters of Evil. So he was originally tied to Ultron.
And that makes sense. And here, he's talking to the twins. The twins have come to try to interrogate him, talk to him for Ultron, something like that. And based on his lines, it seems like Strucker was a client of his.
It does. And also based on his lines, I don't know if you got this sense, Caleb, but I don't think it really flows well with the Black Panther movie, because he states that he was able to go into Wakanda, grab vibranium, escape, which we saw some in the Black Panther movie. We see, I believe, flashbacks of that. But then he says, I paid the price. And he rubs the back of his neck like he was branded with some type of brand because he did that. But that doesn't fit into the Black Panther movie because he wasn't captured after that. So how did
No,
he get the brand?
I think it does fit. I think we've both only seen Black Panther once, so it's a lot to digest. But they do talk about in this film that he was branded. You can see that on his neck, you're right. In Black Panther, they also talk about how he did that years ago. That's not something he's done recently. And so the events that we see in that film are not what they're talking about here.
No, I'm pretty sure those were the events because he stole the vibranium and escaped. And somewhere along the lines he got branded, because you're right, it could have been several years ago, but as we've talked about this time frame.
Well, he actually never makes it to Wakanda in that movie.
We'll talk about this later, Caleb, and our Wakanda. Anyways.
He's here.
That's right. And it's, here that he does lose his hand.
Yeah, his whole arm, actually.
His whole arm.
Most of it, anyway.
Yep, that's correct. With Ultron kind of pulling it off. And Caleb, I do have to say, some of the acting, I guess it wasn't acting, but some of the characterization of Ultron bugs me a little bit. Because in the comics, he's just this super evil robot. And in the movies, not only do they try to humanize him based on his design, they try to give him humor and humanize him. And it kind of makes me cringe now, because I don't think it works well. And I think it goes such against his portrayal in the comics that it's unjust.
Yeah, I see what you mean. I have the same reaction to this as I do his design. It's lessened over time, my issues with it. A lot of this they did specifically to try to tie him back to Tony. So that's very purposely built. But it is very different from the comics, you're right. In the comics, he's like a machine, because he is. He has a directive, and he carries it out. Whatever he has to do. So it is very different, and it would be very shocking if that's all you're looking for.
Well, it's after he rips off Ulysses Claw's hand that the Avengers are able to find Wanda, Pietro, and Ultron, and we get into a second fight. No, a third fight. This is a third fight. What did you think of it?
It was fine. There's some funny moments in here. I like when Pietro tries to grab Thor's hammer, and he can't. Although other than that, there's not much that stands out here in terms of action. There
isn't. This is the first time that we actually get a glimpse of Pietro's slow-mo perspective. And so that's kind of when he grabs the hammer, as well as I believe when he punches Captain America, time slows down and we see him running. What did you think of that?
On first viewing, it was disappointing because I liked the look better in Days of Future Past.
Really?
I did. Because that one was very much more stylized. Going back to it now, it doesn't bother me at all. They specifically wanted something very minimalistic, and that's what they have. The only thing about it I don't really like is the weird blue streaks that trail behind him. Like, they seem to linger a little bit too long, like something's actually there when it's not. That would be the only gripe I have with it.
Okay.
You?
I actually really liked it. I liked it better than Days of Future Past because they didn't focus these entire scenes on the fact of how he runs. It was a glimpse here, a glimpse there, and it gave you enough of understanding his abilities. And I like the kind of blue streaks they show because there is some of that in the comics. And so it fits really well into what he's doing. But while the Quicksilver is running around, we see that Wanda is playing some mind games and that she is able to get Black Widow, Captain America, and Thor, but not Hawkeye, who stabs her with a taser arrow and then makes a joke about how he has already done that before and how it will not happen again.
Yeah. So we basically get these visions for each of the characters that she has affected. First one up is Black Widow. Now, we get some of her backstory here, Zach.
Which hopefully we'll see more of in her solo outing, but it talks a lot about the Red Room. I believe it shows some of what is in her ledger and why that is also red.
Yeah, I agree, and it gives some much-needed background to her as a character other than her just being a S.H.I.E.L.D. agent. And as I mentioned in one of our earlier episodes, I think it was Winter Soldier, The Red Room is touched upon in the Agent Carter TV show, so if you do want to know more about that, you could check out the show.
So just give us like a brief summary of it.
Oh goodness, it's been so long. Basically, it's a training camp. It's what she talks about, really, where they take in these little girls and they train them from very young ages to be assassins. I don't remember what country it's based in. I want to say Russia because Natasha is Russian originally, but don't quote me on that. And that's it. They train you from birth to kill people.
Well, we also see that Wanda has inflicted Captain America, and he is at a dance with Agent Carter.
Yeah, so he is seeing what would be, I'm not sure, it seems to me like a more perfect world, but I believe it's stated somewhere that these are nightmares. So I think it affects each of them differently. We'll see that more with Thor, but yeah, this is his dream to be there and be with Peggy and have that last dance that broke our hearts so much in his movie.
Well, and I think it is kind of a nightmare because he's living it and he knows it can never come true. And then he's kind of looking around, he's realizing that all these people are dead, right? Because it's a dance and then it ends and nobody's around there and it's just him. And an interesting Easter egg in that small clip is that we, for a moment, see that the band that is playing is called the Roy Thomas Band. And as I mentioned, Roy Thomas was one of the creators of Ultron.
Oh, nice. Next up is Thor. We get this vision of Asgard. At the time, people were thinking that this, and a scene later on in the film, were alluding to Ragnarok. The way that film plays out, I don't think that really is true. But here, he has a vision of Heimdall. This is where Loki was supposed to show up in the film. But I do have a question about this. This sequence was originally longer. Black Widow's was a flashback. Captain America's was his worst fear, which is the two explanations we get in this film. Thor's is his worst fear. But if it's just a fear, why does it turn out that the stuff he learns in here about the gems are true? Because he doesn't really know anything about them at this point.
My assumption would be because of maybe the Norse, mythology, maybe of magic, maybe of Heimdall himself. I really don't have an answer for you, Caleb, because I actually disliked a lot of the scenes with Thor. Because it, A, takes him out of the movie later on, and B, I don't think it pays off. It basically sets him up for like his next movie, it seems like. I know you said it doesn't point to Thor Ragnarok, but at the time, it basically, I believe, was setting up for his next solo outing, and it just doesn't really work.
Yeah, it doesn't pay off. And, now that I'm thinking about this, you mentioned earlier that Wanda and Pietro's power does come from the Mind Stone, so maybe now that I'm thinking about it, some of that vision inadvertently comes from her, from the Mind Stone. Like they're connected because her powers came from that. But that seems like a stretch.
Yeah, it really does. The last person we see affected is then the Incredible Hulk. Well, Bruce Banner, who turns into a not-so-incredible Hulk.
Yeah, and he goes off and rages. Now, Zach, we saw Hulk rage in the first movie. We saw Hulk rage in this movie. Are we going to get Hulk rage in Infinity War?
We are going to get Hulk rage in Infinity War. I will say that I thought Hulk looks significantly better in his design and animation than he did in the Avengers. He's less smooth. I said that was an issue I had, and his facial features look a lot more like Bruce Banner's. And so I actually liked what he looked like and how he hulked out in this movie.
Yeah, I remember him looking worse in this movie, but watching it this time, no, he does look better. You are right. And we see him go into that South African city. We see he's got red around his eyes, which is indicating that Scarlet Witch has kind of infected him. Mm-hmm. Originally, he was going to turn gray here. I don't know if you remember, they actually released a Grey Hulk pop for this movie.
Ooh, I did not know that. I do know we missed this reference, but when Tony Stark and Bruce Banner were working on the scepter, Tony Stark said something to the fact of, well, maybe it'll make you turn gray instead of green, which is a callback to the Hulk was originally gray instead of green in the comics.
And not only that, but there has been another Grey Hulk in the comics, commonly known as Joe Fixit, who was a more intelligent version of the Hulk in the comics.
Yes.
Now, they decided not to go the gray version because they felt it was confusing. Joss was the one who wanted to do the gray. I'm assuming that Marvel kind of overrode him on that, which happens a few times in this film. So we just get the red eyes, which I think personally works better because that still leaves Grey Hulk open in the future.
That's right. But another, I guess, first appearance we do see here is we see a new suit for Iron Man, the HULKBUSTER, which is his Mark 44. Now, had you known about this HULKBUSTER suit before you saw it in the movie?
Zach, how are you a fan of Marvel Comics and not know about the HULKBUSTER suit?
You're blind.
Yes, of course I knew about the HULKBUSTER suit. We talked about in Iron Man 3 how people thought Igor was a HULKBUSTER, and they were saying he wasn't, because he wasn't. This is like the actual HULKBUSTER. This looks like it has been ripped straight out of the comics.
Yeah, and it appeared in Iron Man issue 304, which wasn't that long ago. It was 1994. But when I had seen it was in World War Hulk, when the Hulk comes back to Earth to kill everybody for stranding him on Sakaar, which we'll see later. Iron Man puts on this suit of armor. And I mean, it's just like in the comics. It's not a different suit of armor. It's pieces that equip his armor, makes it bulkier, so he is able to take on the Hulk. And Caleb, I don't know if you remember this, but the HULKBUSTER armor was like really pumped up in the trailers. Like this was the kind of culmination and the climax of the trailer. And I remember the first time I saw it, and I remember talking to you about it because we had a nerdgasm. It was like, they're bringing the HULKBUSTER armor to the movies. How awesome.
Yeah, and I think this was actually one of the first things that was leaked from the set, too. It was one of the first things they shot because they had like a life-size gauntlet for the special effects reference on set. And because they were filming in a city, you know, people naturally got pictures of it, and they got onto the internet.
And it's here Iron Man actually calls down Veronica, who helps him equip the HULKBUSTER. Now, this isn't a straight Iron Man comic book reference, but it is a comic book reference. It's from the Archie comics, or for those of you who are 13-year-old female teenagers listening to our podcast from Riverdale. And so in these comics, it's about Archie, who's in love with two girls, Veronica and Betty, which is a callback to the only person that Bruce Banner likes, Betty Ross. And so you have Betty Ross and Veronica. So it's like an interesting hint towards that relationship in the comics. It's also during this fight, Caleb, that we see Hulk crashing into, I believe, a bus or a sign that says Crawford, which is a call out to Dr. Joffrey Crawford, who was a mentor to Bruce Banner in the comics and who also later gains Hulk powers, because everybody in the Hulk comics gains Hulk powers.
Yeah, we've all got to be giant green rage monsters. But I do have a question about this scene, Zach, and I never noticed it till this viewing. So Jarvis is dead, and Tony is piloting the suit. He keeps talking to the suit. Nothing ever talks to him. So Jarvis pilots his suits for him. As much as he's deciding what to do, Jarvis is either reading his mind or he's following predefined stuff, predefined algorithms of what to do, how things should work, of the life support systems. How is he using the suit without an AI to control all those things? And who is he talking to? Because he hasn't loaded his new AI yet.
Yeah, when I was watching this scene, it seemed as if he was talking and interacting with Veronica. So it wasn't an AI that was necessarily maybe in the suit, but it was more of a remote AI that he called in that kind of helped him during this situation.
But even before that, when he's in the shipyard, you still have that same issue. How is he controlling the suit at all? Because it's too much for you to control and like move around and stuff. Like part of that has to be automated.
Yes, I would actually disagree. Tony Stark is considered one of the 5 smartest geniuses in the Marvel comics. And so when watching these movies and the Iron Man movies, I assume that Jarvis is helping the functions that Iron Man just isn't thinking about, but that he doesn't need Jarvis to pilot the suit. He can still pilot it himself. He just won't pilot it as well as he could with an artificial intelligence.
That's interesting, because I've always assumed, based on what we've seen, that he does have to have Jarvis. But another callback we do have in this fight is at the very end. Iron Man punches Hulk from off-screen, punches him, then going off-screen, which is a callback to the first movie when Hulk punches Thor off-screen.
That's right. Now, Caleb, in this next scene, the Avengers are kind of running away with the tail between their legs after the destruction of South Africa, and you have an issue with this scene.
Yeah, so they're on the Quinjet and they're trying to regroup. And it's not so much with this scene in particular, but this is just a good spot to talk about it. Ultron is all over the world. I've already talked about how he's trying to hack nuclear codes, and everything's just going to pot. I mean, you can't use the internet anymore because he's in it, right? But there's no sense of impending doom or urgency in this film at all. And I have a big issue with this because, look, the aliens came down in the first movie. It felt like a big deal. It just happened. Ultron is created in this movie. He goes off, and it's like, it's almost like they've forgotten about him. It's like, oh, no big deal. We'll get to him tomorrow. Like, we'll figure it out. But I feel like there should be just a sense of urgency, a ticking time bomb, if you will, not literally, but something to help push this. And I feel like none of this movie has any of that. And I think that's a really big mistake.
Yeah, Caleb, now that you mention it, I would have to agree with you. I thought this kind of second half fell somewhat flat, and I think it's because of what you just mentioned. There's no sense of urgency. This could have definitely been fixed if they would have shown a short 1-2 minute clip about how Ultron is, making that whatever asteroid not asteroid, but like cutting up the landmass in Sokovia and like his plan. I think they're trying to hide that for a shocker near the end, but this whole, he's trying to get codes, but he fails. You're right. There's no sense of urgency. They're running away, but it doesn't make sense that they're running away. The Hulk went crazy. So what? I'm not really sure why they have to escape to a safe house and try to regroup.
Yeah, it's of any problem I have with this movie, which are not as many as a lot of people. I think this is my biggest issue.
Well, the Avengers make their way to a safe house. And we soon find that this safe house is no ordinary safe house. It is a safe house with Clint Barton's family, who was not... it was kind of teased, because when he originally got hurt in Sokovia, he stated that he doesn't have, any family members. And then later we see him on the phone with his girlfriend when he stated he was single. And so it was kind of setting up, his family, which is revealed. We have Laura Barton and 2 other kids, which is actually taken directly from the comics, the Ultimates.
Yes, and Zach, this, along with all the other stuff about Hawkeye in this movie, are all to convince us that Hawkeye is going to die.
Yeah, it really is. And I remember watching it and thinking in the movie theater, they're gonna kill Hawkeye. No!
Yeah, there's interviews with Joss where he talks about this. He did this very much purposely, trying to get us on board. There's even a scene towards the end of the safe house section where he basically says this is the last mission. And, everybody knows when you say it's your last mission, something bad's going to happen.
It is your last mission. Yeah.
Right. But in the wrong way. And so Joss was trying really hard to throw your scent off because he is known for killing beloved characters.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but I was pretty sure that the rumors were going around that one main Avenger was going to die before this movie was released.
Yeah, I think he even said that, or someone said that. I remember reading that as research for this episode, that someone said someone's going to die, or it might have been specifically that death would be a major theme. And how do you have death be a major theme without someone dying?
Yes, very true.
So we do get that reveal here. It seems Natasha knew all along because she seems to know his wife and their kids, which makes sense because they are so close. Everyone else is completely blindsided, especially Tony, though.
Yeah, and Natasha wants the third daughter to be named after her, which it ultimately is. In the I believe, which it just ultimately is. I don't know what else.
But
to
the
say.
boy version, yeah. Nathaniel.
That's Crew, which is interesting because in the comics, the Ultimates, they have 3 kids, and instead of a boy, it's a daughter, and they name the daughter after a boy because they name her Nicole after Nick Fury.
Interesting. Did not know.
Yeah, so they switched that around a little bit. But you're right. It's here that the Avengers are at the safe house to kind of recoup and get over getting annihilated, basically.
And while they're recouping, Ultron is doing his best to further his plan. He goes to a research lab in South Korea. This is Dr. Cho's lab. She mentioned earlier in the film that she had some kind of cradle, and they used that technology to fix up Clint Barton when he was injured. And so this cradle supposedly can do that, but on a grander scale. And so Ultron comes in, and he basically, I think this is where we learn he wants to evolve beyond a human. And so he wants her to create a new body, basically, but like a hybrid between man and machine.
That's right. Using vibranium that he has stolen and that he has. And so we actually get, a couple scenes here. We're just going to mesh them together. But the first scene is that we see Dr. Cho kind of getting turned. And one of the robots is using the scepter like Loki used it in the Avengers to turn Dr. Cho so that she does whatever Ultron says for her to do. And the second scene we get then is Ultron destroys the staff and takes out the gemstone and puts it into this body's kind of brain that is supposed to power him, I assume.
Yeah, when he puts that there, you actually see there's these lights that form in the head that look like a brain. So yeah, I think that's supposed to maybe not power it per se, but power the intelligence of it. And it is in one of these scenes that Ultron says, talking about the vibranium, that is the most versatile substance on the planet. Now, for a long time, this was just a throwaway line to me, and it's like, oh yeah, it can make a shield, you can code a robot with it, no big deal. But now having seen Black Panther, it is the most versatile substance on the planet. You can do literally anything you want with it.
Yes, that movie brought that line to life.
Yeah, like...
Literally, yeah. But we return back to the safe house, and it's here we have a few interactions between some of the Avengers. So the first one is we see Natalie and Bruce, which... Caleb, while I was watching this in the theaters, I remember explicitly thinking, I hope they don't take it so far as to actually hide the zucchini, which thankfully they don't. And instead, Natalie gives some of her backstory and reveals here that because of the Red Room, she is now sterilized.
Yes, and just to back up a little bit, while she's not hiding the zucchini, she is hiding that she's pregnant in this scene. Scarlett Johansson was pregnant while filming the scene, and actually a lot of this movie. And that's why in this scene in particular, when you do see her whole body, she's holding like a towel in front of herself to hide that.
Yeah, not only did Joss Whedon have to use, stunts like that, but they actually brought on 2 different body doubles. And it's recorded that the cast actually thought these body doubles look so much like Natasha Romanoff that
they kept mistaking the body doubles for her.
Yeah, and in fact, in an interview, Chris Evans states that I think he went up to one of them and started talking and was like, talking to her like she was
Scarlett.
Yeah, I kept saying Natalie Portman. I'm like, she's not Natalie Portman to Scarlett Johansson. And it's like midway through, he realized this wasn't Johansson. And so he just turned around and like walked away.
And I think there was more than just him that did that, reportedly, which is really funny. Now, Zach, you asked me earlier about the romance in this film between these 2 characters. This is where I feel it was taken too far. This scene feels just forced to me. Like I said, I don't mind the flirting in the rest of the movie, but here it seems like it kind of comes out of nowhere. It's kind of awkward. Like, are they really this far along in their relationship? Like, they seem to kind of just go for it, and it's weird.
And then they mention, I believe Natalie mentions, why don't we just run off? And for me, that's like out of left field. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I don't have an issue with them, with the idea of them being a couple, but I feel the way it's handled here is just done very poorly. And, it's also kind of boring. Like, I don't know. It's not the acting, although I do think Scarlett's acting here is a little subpar at times. I know that Joss was heavily criticized for this scene, not only because of them as a couple, but because of the line where she says, or implies that she's a monster, because she's sterile. But my problems are just beyond that. They're more structural with this.
Yeah, and my problems are more based on their relationship. Like you said, Caleb, I wouldn't have an issue with it, but I didn't like it. I thought that their relationship was very forced. I thought it was very Hollywood-esque. Oh, we need to have one relationship in this movie. They're going to be our token couple. And it didn't work for me, and it was forced. Well, the other relationship we get is we have Tony and Steve, who I believe is foreshadowing the next Captain America installment, because it's here that we see that they are at each other's throats.
Yes, there's some conflict here, very similar to what we got in the first movie. And I like it. I think the shot where Cap rips that log in half is just crazy.
It's insane. Chris Evans, what a man.
But I do like the scene. The one complaint I might have is, retrospectively, with Civil War, I've heard people complain that it doesn't work as well as it could have, because every time we see Stark and Cap together in the previous two movies, they're fighting, which is almost true. There's that little bit at the beginning of this movie where they're not fighting. There's a little bit at the end of the Avengers where they're not fighting. But all of their meaningful interactions, they're right. They are fighting. And I think it would have been nice to see a little bit more of their friendship there, so the fallout is greater in Civil War.
Yeah, but I think what you would sacrifice would be the intent, right? So the fallout, yes, would have been greater, but them going head-to-head would have come more out of left field. Where with here, it makes sense that they butt heads. They have always butt heads, and so when we get to Captain America Civil War, it's like, oh, well, yeah, they always fight, so they're going to fight. They're not going to agree. Versus if you showed more of their buddy-buddy side, I think that would have been less convincing about why they didn't just work it out.
Yeah, that's true.
So we get some relationship-building scenes, but that's not all that I have my eye on. I
thought we were stopping there.
I didn't have it in there, but I decided to throw it in. Spice it up some. Give me some meaning.
You skipped Guardians, and I thought we were free. So yeah, Nick Fury pops up.
And it's in here that I have in my notes. Somebody says, the worst part is that you did it. But I have no context on that line, so I have no idea why I put that in my notes. So I have nothing to say.
It is nice to see Nick Fury back. He was such a big part of the first film that, not everybody's going to see all the Marvel films, so they're not going to know. So it is nice to bring him in here. I don't think he helps much. I think he does serve to help bring the team back together again, get them motivated to go back out. Necessary? Only because of what happens later. But he's not necessary in the scene, I don't think.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting to see him, but I don't think he really adds a lot to the scene. And so what we haven't talked about, though, is that during these safe house scenes, Thor left. He, like right when they walked in, he stepped on some Legos and then walked right out and then flew away, stating that he needed to find more about his kind of dream. And so he goes to find Dr. Selvig. I'm assuming he goes to England, but then right after England, he goes to what is called the Waters of Sight. But I don't think it's ever explained where these are. Are these in England? Are they in Asgard? Where are they?
All right, Zach. So I was going to get into this more at the end, which I probably still will. But This whole cave thing was a mess. This was mandated by Marvel. Joss didn't really care for it that much, but he did his best to make it interesting, and he actually shot a lot more stuff. The version that's in the film is quite different than the version that they originally had. So he does go to England to meet Eric, which Eric's not crazy anymore?
I guess, you know what? Caleb is not crazy because if you noticed, there is an absence of a particular annoying female in his life. Yep. Jar Jar Darcy is gone. And now that she is gone, he is of sane mind.
Well, this does continue that trend of Marvel not obeying what they've already set up, because there was no resolution to him being crazy.
True.
But he's not crazy here at all. He is perfectly fine. And Thor comes to him, and they do go off to find these things. I mentioned in one of our earlier episodes, here he was supposed to commune with the Norns, right? So Eric comes in with Thor into this cave. It's not in Asgard. It's explained that there's a reflection of this pool in each realm. So Eric has a box with him. He doesn't open it in the theatrical cut, but in the extended cut, he does. It's got all these things in it. Thor says it's to invoke the Norns. So in the version we got, basically Thor gets in, he gets shocked with lightning, he sees some visions, and he gets out. In the extended version, he gets in the water. He is possessed by the Norns. I think it actually works really well. Thor basically becomes the one that's giving an explanation of things, but it's not Thor the character, because the Norns are possessing him. The shots that are in the film where he's got the lightning coming off of him, in the film it looks like it's hurting him. In the extended cut, that's actually him struggling against the Norns, because when you get in the pool, it's supposed to kill you, right? In exchange for the knowledge they give you, it kills you. And he explains that he has more life than most, so it won't kill him. And so he's struggling against it. But those visions that we see are actually intercut with expository dialogue that he has here. I am sad that this was cut, because what we end up with is kind of a mess.
Yeah, that would make a lot more sense.
Yeah, and it does. I think that the language they delivered it in isn't great. It's very Shakespearean. And it was cut down partially because audiences didn't know what was going on. I think if they would have made it a little bit more plain English, it would have made sense. But basically, it's saying the stones are coming together. There's a guy that's bringing them together. You got to go stop him. You got to investigate. And this also explains why he comes back in later in the film and helps bring Vision to life.
Yeah, I'm now hearing all of that. I'm a little saddened they cut it, because I have always thought those scenes were awkward, weird, didn't make sense. On the other hand, I do see why Marvel mandated that they were in the movie, because for a short, 10 seconds, we get an explanation of the Infinity Gems, right? So the stones are explained what they are, and I think Marvel, Kevin Feige wanted to add that in case a viewer missed the Guardians of the Galaxy and the explanation. But I thought you could have done it differently. I mean, you could have easily had maybe Nick Fury walk in and be like, hey guys, these are the Infinity Gems. It still wouldn't really make a lot of sense, but it would have made more sense than Thor.
Yeah, I think part of the reason that nobody likes it is because in its current form in the film, it doesn't make sense. Personally, I would have left what they had, even if people were confused. There are other people around them that can explain it. That's what happens with their in-credit scenes now anyway. But yes. Let's move on.
Well, we move on to Oslo and the Nexus.
And all I have for this is a public service announcement for everybody. This is not real. There is no internet nexus where everything travels through. That is the exact opposite of the way the internet works. Just so you know.
But what it does do is it gets Tony Stark, Iron Man, away from the next battle, as well as brings back Jarvis, who we'll talk about in a second, after the fact that we get is this a fourth battle now? I do enjoy all this action, but it happens in kind of these chunks. And so we're in South Korea, and it is here that we get
a highway chase.
Yeah, we do get a highway chase between Captain America, the Black Widow, and the twins, and Hawkeye, who is also flying. And it's here, you're right, that the twins change sides. So as Ultron is transferring his essence into this creation, Wanda kind of touches the container and senses that Ultron wants to destroy the world, whereas she thought they were just getting back at the Avengers, not destroy the entire world. And so this is kind of a switch. It's okay. It's not super believable, but it's believable enough.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it makes sense that you realize someone's doing something that you didn't think they were going to do. They're planning on killing you, really. So, switch sides.
Well, and, I think it also shows the characters, because in the comics, Wanda is a little more subdued, and Pietro is kind of cocky. Mm-hmm. And I think that shows a lot in how the characters have developed, and, how they are portrayed in this movie, which fits. It fits really well. And what's interesting about these two characters is that with them kind of switching sides and joining the Avengers, it fulfills what Joss Whedon kind of wanted for them. He's actually stated he brought both the Scarlet Witch as well as Quicksilver into the movie because he wanted different superpowers. He thought the majority of the cast was punchy.
Which is true.
To an extent. I actually don't agree. I think yes, but I think you have some variation. But I also get that he wanted Wanda, who uses magic, and Quicksilver, who's a speedster. So it does bring different powers. And so he's the one that wanted both of those characters in, and that's why they were brought in.
Yeah, and this scene is fine. It's kind of like the other fight scene. There's some good stuff in here, but nothing incredibly memorable except for Black Widow trying to get the cradle out of whatever it's into the Quinjet.
Yeah, and it's here that, we have Ultron, who takes this body and is trying to move it out of South Korea on a truck instead of flying it away, which is kind of weird. And so the Avengers are trying to get it. He's trying to let it go. But I wanted to mention, Caleb, that there's a particular scene within this fight scene where his minions go underneath the semi and then activate their boosters and lift the semi out of the air. Now that whole scene, it took 360 days to complete. So about a year to complete this entire scene because it was done with only one animator. There was one animator put on that, and that was his sole job for an entire year. After he was done, they actually threw him a party and bought him some champagne.
Wow. Yeah, you have to. You make anyone do the same thing for a whole year, and you got to do something for him.
Well, and as you mentioned, Caleb, unfortunately, Natasha is captured, but she is able to get this body into the Quinjet, and the rest of the Avengers escape to go back to the Avengers Tower, with Natasha getting captured by Ultron.
So now that Natasha is captured, and the Avengers have the cradle, they take it back to Avengers Tower. Now, really, only Tony and Banner are there, and Tony decides it's a good idea to try the exact same experiment again to create something else with the cradle, just like he did with Ultron. And Zach, I think he's insane. Yeah,
and it's here, or even back in South Korea, where the line is dropped that Tony doesn't know the difference between basically good and bad. And I think Wanda Maximoff states that. I'm not really sure where this insane Tony Stark comes from.
Yeah, it's not logical. It doesn't make sense. It is only here to drive the plot forward.
But then we get Thor, who also seems insane as he jumps, so we have Quicksilver who unplugs everything, but then Thor jumps on this container and then electrocutes it. So I actually thought he was trying to destroy this being, not create it.
Yes, that's what I thought the first time I saw it. I didn't realize until I saw that extended scene in the cave, and also some commentary by Joss Whedon, that he actually came in and purposely charged this to help create Vision. And so Vision is kind of this beautiful accident where he's a combination of Thor's lightning, the body that Dr. Cho was making, Tony's ideas, Jarvis, and Ultron, because part of Ultron has already been uploaded into that body.
That's right. And it's out of it that we get the Vision. So the Vision actually has an interesting kind of comic book origin. It actually appeared in Timely Comics, which was the original Marvel Comics, and back in the 40s. And it was Marvel Mystery Comics issue 13, created by Joe Simon and Jack Kirby. And it was called The Vision, and his name was Arcus, Aarkus. It's this very, very odd kind of Vision character, but he was recreated in Avengers issue 57 by Roy Thomas and Joe Buscema in 1968. So this is just 3 comics after Ultron. And they basically just relaunched this Vision from the 40s. And it's in the comics that Ultron basically wants to create an android to help him fight the Avengers. And so he kidnaps Phineas T. Horton, who was the creator of the original Human Torch. We mentioned him back in our Captain America podcast, the android. And he steals mind patterns from another Avenger called Wonder Man. And he kind of mixes all this together and makes this android, the Vision. So the Vision does come to life. He is kind of this, android that Ultron uses. Unfortunately, Horton dies. However, the Vision is sent to attack the Avengers, but decides to actually help them. So they have some fight scenes, and then the Vision basically just turns. He's like, yeah, I'll help you guys. Ultron's evil. And then, as I mentioned before, Vision and Scarlet Witch end up getting married. They have a romantic relationship. And then that gets wiped off from the comics. And I believe now in the comics, he has a new robotic family. I'm not really sure. It's very odd, very weird. But as a side note, I will say this, that many DC fans think that the Martian Manhunter was ripped off by Marvel when they created the Vision, because the Martian Manhunter was created about 10 years earlier than that second incarnation of the Vision, when in reality, it was actually Martian Manhunter was ripped off of that original Vision from the 1940s that was relaunched again, in the 1968. So there you go, DC fans. Boom. Now, what did you think of his design?
I think he looks great. They actually tried to do this practically with makeup, and it looks like he's in makeup. He's actually not. One of the producers says he's a full CG model. I don't think that's entirely correct either. I think what they did is they overlaid some CGI on top of him to make his face look a little bit more robotic, to improve some features in the costume. But he looks great.
He really does. And it's right after this that the Avengers convince him to basically join them and fight with them. And he lifts Thor's hammers. Now, I know a lot of comic book fans had gripes about this, because how can he lift Thor's hammer when only he who shall be worthy? I actually loved it, because it ties back into that opening, or one of the opening scenes with the Avengers trying to lift the hammer, and just proves in that one simple shot how powerful Vision is.
Yeah, and they're also standing there debating on if they should trust him, and the fact that he's able to lift it is what convinces them that they should trust him.
Exactly.
So now that they've got the Vision on their side, we do get a shot back in Sokovia with Ultron, of Black Widow in captivity.
Yeah, and that we see that Ultron, I believe, talks to her. I mean, I don't think that's, it's a lot of important dialogue, but we get a new Ultron design, which we've already talked about. And then we see that Black Widow is able to send some coordinates via Morse code so that Clint Barton knows where she's at.
And there is a cutscene here. It's not on any of the discs, so I don't know what all it contained. But in the trailers, it was heavily shown that there's a scene where there's molten vibranium being poured over Ultron. His hand is really what was shown in the trailers. That is this newest version of the suit that comes in and rips up the old one.
That's right. So he now has a vibranium suit, which is a ton more powerful and a lot more indestructible. So we jump right after that into the Avengers Tower, where Barton relays where Black Widow is, and so the Avengers start to suit up, and it's here where we see Tony Stark puts in Friday into his Iron Man suit. So this is actually somebody from the comics. It's an AI. It appeared in Volume 3, Issue 53, which was in 2002, and it's just basically a female AI that's a little more subdued than Jarvis. What's interesting about that shot is that if you look at the AIs he could choose from, one of them is Jocasta, which I already mentioned was the wife that Ultron made for himself in the comics.
So now that the Avengers are geared up and ready to go, they fly out to Sokovia. And here, when Iron Man first shows up, we see that he's got another new armor, Mark 45.
Now, I didn't really realize that this was actually a new Mark. To me, it looked like his Mark 43.
Oh, well, I don't know if you were looking, Zach, because this thing looks way different. It is very much more sleek. It looks a lot like the Bleeding Edge armor from the comic books. It's not, because we're getting that armor later, but it is... The CGI on it's not the best, but design-wise, it's probably my favorite in the movies up until Age of Ultron.
Yeah, I mean, and it's here that we get our final fight scene. Caleb, Iron Man saves a family by telling them to get into a tub and then pushes them through this tub. I don't know about you, but for me, it felt like a callback to the Fantastic Four, who would fly around in a car that looked like basically a bathroom tub. So I'm sure that wasn't intentional, but that is my own Easter egg.
That's funny. So what did you think of this in battle?
Yeah, it was okay. I thought we had some cool scenes like Quicksilver. I loved, some of his scenes that they have. The kind of side storyline between Wanda as well as Hawkeye was okay. The Natasha Bruce scene was weird when she's like, I need the other guy, pushes Bruce Banner, kisses him and pushes him, and then he comes back as the Hulk, was just, what? Right? But, there's some cool shots. The Avengers, when they finally assembled together, was a sweet shot. As we are told that Ultron has used the vibranium and energy to basically cut out a circle around Sokovia, and is starting to lift that into the air. And we actually get foreshadowing in this kind of this plan, because he states how simple the dinosaurs' extinction was with a comet that crashed into the earth and wiped out everything. And so the idea is that is his plan now, is that he's going to raise it up in the sky and drop it like a comet to wipe out the entire earth. What did you think about this end scene?
It's fine. I think for me, the most memorable parts are the Hawkeye, Scarlet Witch scenes. I really like that, where he says that she's going to be an Avenger if she walks out. Anything with Vision in it. I love Vision in this movie. I love his visual style. All of that's great. I do like when they're all grouped up together and they're defending that point in the middle. However, this whole thing is a little bit of a rehash of the first film. That's one of the drawbacks here, and one of the issues with just an Avengers movie in general is, how do you keep everybody occupied? So that's a lower point for me. But I do enjoy it. I think it might be a little bit too long, though.
Yeah, overall it was a good fight scene. We also do see that we have the One-Eyed Man himself makes an appearance with War Machine. Now, Caleb, he is full War Machine without the Iron Patriot skin that we saw in Iron Man 3. Was there a reason they decided to retcon that?
I don't think it's a retcon so much as just a continuation. They went back. I just thought maybe they want to go away from that brand since the president was kidnapped and put into it.
Yeah.
That doesn't seem like very good PR.
No, not at all. That would make a lot of sense.
Yeah. But when Fury does show up, he has that original helicarrier. And Zach, it's actually explained in the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. TV show that Coulson got this helicarrier ready for Fury.
Ooh, okay. So that's an interesting plug. We also actually see the loyal launch technician from Winter Soldier The guy that when Hydra took over S.H.I.E.L.D., he's like, I'm not going to launch the codes.
Okay. Yeah, because I saw him and I was like, he looks really familiar. Who is he?
Exactly. That is where you saw him. The one who Agent Carter, not Agent Carter, excuse me. Well, yes, Agent Carter, but the younger...
Agent 13.
Yes, Agent 13, the younger Carter, told him not to fire the codes, and then he was like, I'm not going to fire it off. So yeah, he makes an appearance.
Now, the big moment in all of this, Zach, is the death of Quicksilver.
That's right. And so as we've mentioned, they were building up to kill Hawkeye, and so you see it coming. Hawkeye goes to save a kid. Yep. Ultron, at this point...
He gets off of a boat that's about to leave.
That's right. And at this point, the heroes have been able to sort of defeat Ultron. And so first Vision contacted Ultron and I believe shut him down from the interwebs. And so he's cut off, but he can still transfer his body between different machines.
Yeah. So in each machine, I think, is basically a copy of him. And he can turn them on and off, but he's not allowed to use the internet to escape. Okay,
so the Vision cut him off from that, and then we also see that some of the Avengers have basically critically hurt him, and at this point he's found his way into one of the Quinjets and is flying around and trying to mow everybody down. I thought this was a really weird way for him to attack the Avengers, but whatever. And so he's about to kill one of the younger kids that we've kind of seen throughout this battle scene, who him and his sister or mom are trying to escape. And so Hawkeye runs to dive in front of the kid. And alas, Quicksilver saves them both and then utters his, I bet you didn't see that coming, and dies.
A lot of people had issue with this because they're like, how can Quicksilver, a guy who can move super fast, die from bullets? And I was watching very carefully this time. There's an earlier scene in the movie where you see a bullet come up from below him, and you see him in slow motion with it. That bullet is still moving. It's slower, obviously, than a regular bullet would move, but it's still moving at a pretty good pace. So I don't think he had enough time to get out of the way, because if he runs over and the bullets are mere inches from Clint and the kid, and he pushes them out of the way, there's not enough time to actually then get out of the way. So I can go with that in this movie.
Yeah, and earlier in this scene, he actually does get shot. So there's a precedent set for it. Emotionally, did you connect with it? I mean, it was definitely a shocker because you most likely thought Hawkeye was going to die.
It was definitely a shock. His death emotionally didn't do much to me. What did is the following shot where Scarlet Witch falls to her knees and cries. That was very emotional.
Yes. I would agree. Quicksilver's death was okay. I get why they might have killed him off, because you don't want a Quicksilver in a universe where you can go over to the X-Men movies and see another version of him. So it makes sense. I'm kind of sad we didn't get to see more of him in the movie, but I'm glad they still kept Wanda around.
So since Ultron is in that Quinjet, Hulk basically jumps up into it, grabs him, and throws him out. But Hulk stays in the ship, Zach.
Yeah, he stays in it, and he just kind of sits down and glides away. At the heat of Black Widow, who's trying to get him back, and he goes away. Now, I mean, it's right after this scene we learn that the ship might have crashed in the water, and so I think they were leaving it open as to what would become the fate of the Hulk. But I'm assuming we're just trying to take him off the plate for Captain America Civil War.
Yeah, so originally it was going to be much more explicit that he was going into space. Then the rumor started that Marvel was going to do a Planet Hulk movie, and Marvel decided, let's not put him going into space, because at the time they were not planning to do a Planet Hulk movie. So it was going to be ambiguous. Ultimately, as we know now, they did kind of do a Planet Hulk movie.
Yes.
So he did go into space. That's in Thor Ragnarok. So it's kind of like a weird back and forth. But yeah, they didn't know what they were going to do with him. And so that's why they wanted to leave it open.
Now, we also got a really interesting, and for me, probably one of the best scenes in this movie, with the death of Ultron. We have the Vision and Ultron's last remaining body, and they have a really good dialogue where Ultron calls the Vision kind of naive, and Vision's like, well, I was born yesterday. And just great acting by both actors. I thought this was probably one of the most emotional, intense, kind of fulfilling moments in the movie. And it just kind of, it was a great, if it had ended there, I would have been satisfied.
Yeah, I agree. And as I said, anything with Vision in it, I love. So this scene, perfect.
Yes. Well, it's after this final battle that we kind of get this final scene where we are transported to upstate New York and we see a new Avengers facility. And it's here that we kind of get some interesting send-offs. So Robert Downey Jr. is kind of riding away, and it's indicated that he is no longer going to be suiting up as Iron Man with Captain America leading the Avengers. So is this Robert Downey Jr.'s last contractual movie?
I think that he was actually signed on for the next Avengers film as well. So I don't really know why they decided to go this direction with him. And the same thing for Barton, too, Hawkeye. It seems that he is leaving the team as well, and the only people that are staying are Cap and Black Widow. Yeah,
that was kind of odd. Again, I'm not really sure why they decided to do that. But they do then form a new Avengers team, where we have the Vision, Captain America, Black Widow, War Machine, and the Falcon.
And Scarlet Witch.
Yes, and Scarlet Witch. Which, side note, we see them again in Captain America Civil War without War Machine.
Hadn't thought about that. I don't know. I'll have to see the movie again.
And to end the movie, we get another big tease where they're teasing the Avengers catchphrase, Avengers Assemble, and Captain America says, Avengers, and you see that he's going to say the word assemble, and then it cuts.
Yeah, so there's two cool things here. At the end, Joss actually wanted Captain Marvel and Spider-Man to appear in this lineup. Captain Marvel had not been cast yet, so he couldn't, and the Spider-Man deal with Sony was in the works, but was not finished yet, so they also couldn't. And Marvel also didn't want to introduce Captain Marvel there without any explanation, which makes sense.
Yep.
The other thing is the Avengers Assemble line. Joss never filmed him saying assemble because he never wanted that to be in the film. And he said he knew that if he filmed it, someone was going to say, oh, you accidentally cut it off, and he was going to be forced to put it in.
That's actually quite funny.
Yeah. So then we get our credits, which is a really cool kind of granite sculpture thing. And then our mid-credit scene, Thanos.
Yeah, but his Infinity Gauntlet is a little different. We actually get, I believe it's a left hand Infinity Gauntlet versus a right hand.
It is a left hand, which is the hand it's on in the comics.
That's right. And I believe the reason they showed this was that it was still not disproven, which it will be in the next Thor movie, that the Infinity Gauntlet we see in the throne room of Odin was a forgery, because that one is assumed to be the right Infinity Gauntlet, so that there is two in the world.
Right. And it's also to say, all right, Thanos is not going to send other people to find the gems anymore. He'll do it himself.
Which is the last glimpse we see of him until we'll see him again in Infinity War as a pink, slim grape.
And this film does not have an after the credits scene.
I was shocked.
I incorrectly stated in The Incredible Hulk that it was the only one without one. I did not remember this at all. It doesn't have one either, so there's two. My bad, guys. Sorry.
Well, I'm actually not that shocked. No,
yeah, I mean, you show Thanos as your mid-credits. What are you going to do afterwards?
That's right. No, I did not remember this didn't have an end-credit scene. How cruel to make people sit through all of that to not show an end-credit scene. But alas, there was none.
Which actually, when it came out, I saw this after the fact, they told people there wasn't going to be one. So people knew, but I'm sure they stayed anyway.
I would have.
I think I did.
All right, so Caleb, a rather interesting movie for the Avengers' second debut. How did this do commercially and critically?
Well, Obviously, Zach, this is a follow-up to the Avengers as well as the entirety of the MCU, so it did very well. It was released on May 1st, 2015, with a budget of $316 million. Its worldwide gross was $1,405 million, which is a almost 500% return, making it the third MCU film to crack $1 billion. Critically, it's sitting at a 75% on Rotten Tomatoes and a 66 on Metacritic, so lower than the previous film. And it was nominated for 36 awards, won 4 of them, including Best Film Costume Design, which I think it deserves entirely. So, financially did very well. Critically, good, but not as good as the other one.
Which would make sense.
Yeah.
Well, as far as legacy goes, I know one huge impact was that Joss Whedon would not be returning for a third Avengers. I know he stated that he didn't like juggling all the characters. For the first Avengers, it was okay, but for this one, it just wasn't fun, and he thought it was exhausting, and so he kind of signed off after.
Yeah, I don't know if you remember, Zach, but you could see in the interviews that he was doing for press for this film how tired he was. He looked exhausted, like he didn't want to do anything except sleep for a whole week. And he wasn't happy with some of this film either. As I mentioned or alluded to, he fought with the Marvel executives. So the two things he was fighting for was the farm and the Scarlet Witch dream sequences. He wanted those. Marvel wanted the cave. He said at one point, Marvel basically put a gun to the farm and said, look, if you don't give us the cave, we're taking out the farm. And he said it got very nasty, very unpleasant. I'm sure that has some of what to do with why he decided not to return. He said he was, quote, so beaten down. And it really looked like he was ready to give up. So, I mean, that says a lot right there.
Yeah, for sure.
But other than that, on a more positive note, the movie, it obviously set up a new Avengers team, which is awesome, which is, we haven't mentioned, is in the comics. The Avengers are known as a rotating roster team. New people are constantly being added. People are constantly leaving. It's ever-changing. So it's cool they brought that in here. Obviously, it introduced another female hero to the MCU, which was sorely lacking, considering all the testosterone we have. It did bring in those new powers into MCU, which I know you didn't agree with me, but I think most of the powers in the first movie were punching and flying, and that's it. So it is nice to have some more like actual superpowers going on with the Speed and the Scarlet Witch. And it brought the Infinity Stone problem to the hero's attention in the films. Thor knows what's going on now. We didn't mention it, but at the end of the film, he goes off and says he's going to go look into these stones more. So it's something they're aware of now instead of it being in the background.
That's right. And I mean, when you look at the screen time for each of these characters, it's really interesting with the breakdown. So obviously in last place is the Vision with 8 minutes and 41 seconds. But in second to last place is Thor. He only got 14 minutes and 18 seconds of screen time, which I thought was kind of astonishing, but makes sense. And I think it actually hurt the movie a lot. So that the Marvel execs were not correct in this one. So we have Hawkeye, who gets about 20 minutes at 19:56. Scarlet Witch gets 20 minutes and 59 seconds. The Hulk gets 23 minutes and 55 seconds. And in fourth place is Quicksilver, who actually gets 26 minutes and 43 seconds. So he actually gets a lot of screen time. And then our top three was Black Widow with 33 minutes and 7 seconds. And who comes in first, Captain America or Iron Man?
Tony, for sure.
So Iron Man actually comes in second place with only 45 minutes and 34 seconds. And just like the first Avengers, Captain America beats out Iron Man. But unlike the first Avengers, instead of just a few more seconds, he got 5 more minutes of screen time with 50 minutes and 25 seconds.
Do you know if that screen time includes regular Tony?
I do not.
Okay. Because I was just wondering, I was thinking all of the Ultron scenes with him in the lab, it seems like he's in it way more than Steve is.
Correct, but I think you get a lot more of Steve in that chase scene in South Korea where you don't get any Iron Man. And so I think Iron Man is Iron Man / Tony Stark.
Okay. That makes sense.
So Caleb, now that we have gone through the movies, where does this line up in your rankings of the MCU movies to date?
So I feel that while talking about this film, out of all of them, this one really I haven't given a sense at all of where I would put it. While talking about them, I haven't been overly praising it. I haven't been overly hating on it. And really, that's where I am with this film. It's kind of middle of the road for me. It does some great things. I've mentioned I really love Vision. As a character, I couldn't get enough of Vision when this movie came out. I just love what they did with him. This film has some great character interactions. I'm glad that the team is together most of the time in the film. It really is a strong point for it. It helps set it apart from the first film, where they were really only together at the end. Ultron, as a character, feels just as real as Rocket or Groot, which is very important. I mean, in fact, I was sitting down thinking about the CGI. I didn't even think about Ultron and his CGI because he feels so real. Regardless of if you like his characterization or not, he feels solid. He feels like he's in the world, which is great. There are a few small CGI scenes here and there that don't work so well. Overall, I think the CGI is amazing in this film, especially since there is so much of it. I love the world building, the new Avengers stuff, the Avengers Tower. All of that's great. The problems with this movie? The farm. I don't hate the farm, but the farm kills the pacing. It's weird. The cave. Thor's cave, it makes no sense the way it's in the movie. It feels disjointed, as well as his entrance back into the movie. And so it has some problems. There's things that it ignores from previous films that also make it not great and not fit in as well. So this is about middle of the road for me. So I look at the middle of my list and I have to try to figure out where it goes. Definitely not as good as the Avengers. So it's already below that. Iron Man, there's parts of this film I enjoy more because it's got the character interaction. There's parts that I don't enjoy as much. This drags a bit. I think it's below Iron Man. I think where I'm going to end up putting this is in between my two Thor movies. Right now I've got Thor and Thor 2 stacked together at 5 and 6. I think it's going to go in between them and it's going to be number 6. Because, yeah, those Phase 1 movies, they are a lot more quaint. But dude, they go straight through. They're paced really well. And so they're fun to watch. This one, because it does slow down some, it's tough. Which brings my new list, starting from number 1, going to number 10, to Captain America, the Winter Soldier, Guardians of the Galaxy, The Avengers, Iron Man, Thor, The Avengers Age of Ultron, Thor the Dark World, Captain America, the First Avenger, The Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 3, and then Iron Man 2. Zach, tell us your thoughts.
Yeah, this movie seemed like a middle-of-the-road movie to me. So what worked great? The Vision. I cannot get enough of the Vision. I wish we would have seen more of him. He was amazing. I thought James Spader's acting as Ultron was perfect. Not the humorous Ultron, but everything else. I thought adding in Elizabeth Olsen as Wanda and Aaron Taylor-Johnson as Pietro were amazing. A side note I forgot to mention was that Aaron Taylor-Johnson was actually told to debulk. He was too bulky for this role because a runner should be slim, and so he actually had to lose weight. And his bulkiness. I thought the fight scenes that were included in this were epic, and the continued jokes. So there was a lot of high points in this movie that I really enjoyed. Unfortunately, I thought there was also a lot of low points. The villain, Ultron, just wasn't a great villain for me. I didn't like his motivation. I thought his character development was bad. I thought how he looked was pretty bad, and how he was portrayed. The plot of this movie, as you stated, Caleb, was kind of lackluster. It was okay, but I didn't think there was a lot of momentum with Tony Stark and where he was going, as well as there was a lot of dead space in this movie. The farm, the caves, the whole kind of middle section of this movie was rather boring. And then finally, some just terrible relationships. The Natasha Bruce Banner relationship did not work and felt very, very forced. And so while there were some high points to this movie, there were unfortunately a lot of low points as well. And so where I think this lands, I think it is middle of the tier. It definitely does not beat the Winter Soldier, the first Avengers, or Guardians of the Galaxy. And so where I have to look at it is my fourth movie is Iron Man, my fifth is Captain America, my sixth is Thor 2, and my seventh is Thor. And so does this beat Iron Man? No, it's not as funny. It's not as great. Does it beat Captain America? I wish it would, but I love Captain America's setting and the just, I guess I love how Captain America is developed in that movie. Now, does it beat Thor and Thor 2? Yes, it does. And so where this lines up in my movie list is the same as yours, Caleb. It is also my number 6. So ranking the 11 MCU movies that I have, going from number 1 to number 11 in order, is Captain America Winter Soldier, then The Avengers is number 2, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, then Iron Man is 4, Captain America 5.
You said Volume 3.
Oh, no. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1 is my number 3, if that clears it up. Because then Age of Ultron is my number 6, Thor 2, then Thor is 8, Iron Man 2 is 9, Incredible Hulk is 10, and at the bottom of the list is still the still terrible Iron Man 3 as number 11. So this is a very mid-tier movie. There's a reason I haven't gone back and watched it again. It's because there are simply better movies out there to watch. And so we would like to give a quick shout out to Taylor Poole, who has done our awesome music for us. That is TaylorPoole music.com or .org. You know, you put something in, you'll find him. Just like Ultron, you will find him.
And while you're waiting on our next episode, you can check out our friends at CNC Power Hour over on Twitch. They stream Magic every Sunday at 4 o'clock Eastern Time and video games throughout the week. That's C, the letter N, C, Power Hour.
Thanks for listening to 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, The Avengers, Age of Ultron. We would love to hear your comments or feedback at cuzwerenerds@gmail.com. That's CUZWERENERDS@gmail.com. Or leave us a review or comment on iTunes. You can also follow us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, or any other major social network or podcasting sites. Join us next week as our podcast shrinks in scale to cover Ant-Man. Why was Ant-Man considered to be in Phase 2? Slated next to Iron Man, why did it take until 2015 for this movie to finally come out? And can an original Avenger hold his own without getting moviegoers Marvel fatigue? Find out these questions and much more on 'Cause We're Nerds, Road to Marvel's Infinity War, Ant-Man. Stay nerdy. I was going to just ask you, like, are you familiar with them in the comics, Caleb? Why, no, Zuck, I'm not. Tell me about it. Tell me your knowledge. Well, I don't know all of this from my knowledge that I had to do no research on. And then I proceed to tell you it all.